Hello and welcome to week 6 of FCAO Introduction to Philosophy. Building off of last week, let's once more dive into the mind-body debate. The mind is about thought and consciousness, the body about neurons and how the brain is structured. Is the mind part of the body or is the body part of the mind? If they're separate, then how do they interact? And more importantly, which of the two is in charge? Let's talk about the differences between monism and dualism. The metaphysics of monism. We have materialism and phenomenalism to talk about first. Materialism is the belief that nothing exists apart from the material world. Materialist psychologists generally agree that consciousness is a function of the brain. To a materialist, mental processes can be identified with purely physical processes in the central nervous system, and human beings are just complicated physiological organisms and nothing more. Another form of monism is phenomenalism. And phenomenalism believes that physical objects and events are reducible to mental objects, properties, and events. Ultimately, only mental objects exist. What we think of as our body is merely the perception of the mind. Take a break now and read Philosophical Materialism by Richard Witztham and answer the questions online. Welcome back. I'm sure you saw from your reading that Witztham believed Lucretius's poem was a hallmark because it focused more on direct observation of nature and explaining the world in terms of nature, rather than basing his theory on abstract philosophical ideas. It's based in scientific fact. And why in the modern day do a majority of professional philosophers identify themselves as materialists? Well, I think it's because the major discourses in the scientific community have led them to believe that most wonders and questions of the universe can be explained through modern scientific evidence and analysis. Next up, free will and determinism. Our objectives are going to be construct arguments for both determinism and free will, and to reflect upon and analyze the daily decision-making process. Let's begin with some basic definitions. Free will is the power of acting without the constraint of necessity or fate, the ability to act at one's own discretion. Determinism is the assertion that every event in the universe has a cause, and since human acts are events, they also have causes. Furthermore, if every event or action has a cause, then every event or action is predictable. Some things to think about. You deliberate, and deliberation is an attribute of free will. You wouldn't deliberate about things of which the outcome is already known. So when we deliberate, we at least conceive that we are in control. If a future event is out of our control, we engage in passive thinking. We speculate. So you deliberate about what you're going to eat for lunch. You might passively wonder about who you'll marry someday. Some more things to consider. We all assume prima facie that we are the author of our own choices. However, when we ask why we chose the way we chose, we can begin to offer a number of reasons. If we're able to supply a reason for every decision we make, what happens to the idea that we made it freely? Are our actions and decisions not merely determined by a string of antecedent causes? And if your actions are determined, or can be determined, why do we think they're made freely? And some more things to think about. The notion of free will is institutionalized through our American legal system. The courts distribute different punishments to the mentally ill, who are thought to have less will than they do to the average criminal. We allow for mitigation when sentencing. The courts have, in a sense, decided that some acts are made more freely than others. This leads to some big questions concerning punishments. If our actions are determined, how do we justify punishing people? If our actions are determined by a series of antecedent causes, can we then predict an outcome based on a certain set of causes? And if yes, should we then incarcerate people before they commit a crime? Would this be just? The debate of free will versus determinism belongs in metaphysics because it raises questions about the ultimate nature of things. One last clarification. If we ask what the difference is between determinism and predestination or fate, we have to understand that predestination says God has decided from the beginning of time who will or will not be saved, and that can't be changed. Fate refers to universal forces beyond anyone's control. And so predestination and fate involves supernatural powers. Determinism says that for every event there is some set of causal conditions, but it does not put a supernatural force as the cause of those conditions. Okay, this assignment is going to be create a causal chain. So the first thing you're going to do is take a list of 10 personal events that have occurred within the last 48 hours. And I want you to then identify whether they were done just because you wanted to or whether they were done because of previous influence. Finally, on Schoology, you're going to also create a causal chain. Follow the directions online and submit. Welcome back. Let us look at free will and determinism and crime. Our objectives are to examine the question of liability in criminal behavior by taking a stance of a determinist or by advocating free will. And I want to examine the culpability of convicted criminals. Applying the arguments of free will and determinism to the dilemma of legal culpability raises some interesting questions. It would not be fair to blame people if they were not in total control of a situation or event. Yet, juveniles are tried in adult court sometimes, and mentally unstable people are allowed to represent themselves in the court of law. Complete the Determinism Notes assignment and then return back here. Let's review your definitions. Biological determinism. historically a very dangerous idea. Think social Darwinism or the Nazis. And it's the idea that all human behavior is determined by genes or other biological attributes. It is essentially a denial of free will. But in the wake of the mapping of the human genome, it is a realm of determinism that people will continue to research. Causal determinism is the idea that every event is necessitated by antecedent events and conditions together with the laws of nature. It's an ancient idea. Determinism is deeply connected with our understanding of the physical sciences. A plus B equals C. Because these things happened, this thing happened. Compatibilism. It offers a solution to the free will problem. Free will is compatible with determinism. Free will is a necessary condition of moral responsibility. Compatibilism is sometimes expressed as a thesis about the compatibility between moral responsibility and determinism. Compatibilists believe freedom can be present or absent in situations for reasons that have nothing to do with metaphysics. And finally, free will. The freedom of humans to make choices that are not determined by prior causes or by divine intervention. The opposite of psychological altruism is psychological egoism. Suppose, for example, there's a fire, and I save Mr. Elder from that fire. Psychological egoism would say that I was motivated by the goal to benefit myself. Whether people are going to look badly on me if I leave him to die, or whether people are going to celebrate me as a hero because I saved him. Your last assignment for the week is free will, determinism, and crime. You're going to choose a criminal, a convicted criminal, research them, and then determine their culpability based on various philosophies. As you can see online, I first want you to give me a brief description of the crime and the criminal. And then from the perspective of a causal determinist, a compatibilist, or a free will advocate, tell me their level of guilt. After you've examined their level of guilt from these different perspectives, please give me your personal opinion. It can definitely align with one of the previous perspectives, but I want to know what you thought after examining this crime from various perspectives. Thanks for another great week. See you next week.